Everyone talks about the 1960s like it was the holy era of muscle cars. Roaring V8s, smoking tires, and pure American horsepower. But let's be real. For every legend that ruled the streets, there were a dozen wannabes that couldn't outrun a school bus. These were the overhyped, chrome-covered disappointments that promised speed but delivered yawns. They looked tough, sounded cool in ads, and then drove like sedated lawnmowers. Some were engineering disasters, others were just marketing lies on four wheels. So grab a seat. Gearheads, we're taking a hilarious joyride through 20 of the most worthless muscle cars the 60s ever spat out. Number 1. Studebaker Avanti, 1962-1963. In the early 60s, Studebaker had a bold idea: build America's next great performance coupe, a sleek, fiberglass-bodied rocket that would scare Corvettes and charm Wall Street. Enter the Avanti. On paper, it was a dream. Aircraft-inspired styling, supercharged V8, disc brakes, and a space-age interior that felt like it belonged in the Jetsons. But dreams die fast when reality hits. Studebaker's tiny, cash-starved factory couldn't build them properly or quickly enough. Early cars were plagued with quality control nightmares, doors that didn't fit, trim that fell off, and engines that needed babysitting. And for a performance car, it wasn't exactly blowing anyone's doors off. By the time Studebaker sorted out the bugs, the brand was already on life support. And the Avanti, despite all the hype, became a symbol of a company's last desperate gasp. Today, it's remembered less as a classic and more as a cautionary tale. You can't save a dying company with style alone. Number 2. Oldsmobile Jetfire, 1962-1963. Turbocharging in the early 60s. Oldsmobile thought they were building the future. The Jetfire was the world's first turbocharged production car, and on the brochure, it looked revolutionary. 215 horsepower from a compact aluminum V8 sounded thrilling. And the turbo rocket fluid injection system was pure science fiction for its time. But in practice, it was a mechanical disaster. The fluid injection system needed constant refilling and maintenance, something buyers knew nothing about. And when neglected, engines detonated like popcorn in a microwave. Even when it ran properly, the Jetfire was finicky, expensive, and almost impossible for mechanics of the day to service. Owners hated it, dealers dreaded it, and Oldsmobile quietly killed the project after just 2 years. What was supposed to be a performance breakthrough ended up as one of the most embarrassing flops of the muscle car era. A classic example of too much technology. Too soon. Number 3. Chevrolet Corvair, 1960-1969. The Corvair started with big promises. A lightweight, rear-engined American sports car that could take on European rivals while still being practical for the suburbs. And initially, people loved the idea. It was quirky, affordable, and stylish. A daring move from conservative Chevrolet. But then reality was a bit hard. The early models had a dangerous swing-axle rear suspension that made them notoriously unstable in corners. A problem made worse by Chevy's cost-cutting decisions, like omitting a crucial stabilizer bar. Ralph Nader's infamous book, Unsafe at Any Speed, slammed the Corvair for its deadly handling, and the car's reputation never recovered. Sales tanked, lawsuits followed, and the Corvair became the poster child for Detroit negligence. By the late 60s, it was a punchline, a performance car best known for flipping over. Chevy quietly pulled the plug, and the Corvair went down in history as proof that good intentions and engineering shortcuts don't mix. Number 4. Rambler Marlin, 1965-1967. When AMC tried to join the muscle car party, they showed up with the Marlin, a bizarre fastback coupe that looked more like a beached whale than a road shark. The idea was solid. Take the sensible Rambler, give it a sporty roofline, and lure in younger buyers. The execution? A total miss. The Marlin was heavy, underpowered, and based on a family sedan chassis that handled like a sofa on roller skates. It had all the aggression of a goldfish, and none of the muscle its looks promised. Buyers didn't bite. Many couldn't even figure out what the Marlin was supposed to be. Was it a grand tourer, a muscle car, a personal luxury coupe? It failed at all three. AMC tried tweaking the formula, but by 1967 it was obvious. The Marlin wasn't catching anything except dust on showroom floors. Today, it's remembered less as a muscle car and more as a weird automotive footnote, proof that slapping a fastback roof on a family car doesn't make it cool. Number 5. Plymouth Barracuda. First gen, 1964-1966. The name Barracuda promised something fierce, a sleek, predatory muscle machine ready to chew up the streets. What buyers actually got was more like a goldfish with a racing stripe. Plymouth rushed the Barracuda to market just weeks before Ford unleashed the Mustang, hoping to cash in on the pony car craze. But while the Mustang roared, the early Barracuda barely growled. Its base 6-cylinder engine was laughably weak, and even the V8 options were underwhelming compared to its rivals. The styling didn't help either. That giant wraparound rear window made it look more like a fishbowl than a street predator. Handling was clumsy. The interior was plain, and the performance car label was more wishful thinking than reality. By the time Plymouth figured out how to make the Barracuda genuinely exciting, Ford had already run away with the market. Today, the first-gen Cuda is mostly remembered as a slow, awkward prototype for the muscle monster it eventually became. But in the mid-60s, it was a serious disappointment. Number 6. Ford Falcon Sprint. Early 1960s. Ford tried a sneaky trick with the Falcon Sprint. Take a boring, economy-focused sedan and dress it up like a muscle car. The result was about as convincing as your grandpa wearing a leather jacket and calling himself a rebel. Sure, the Sprint had a V8 under the hood. And yes, it was lighter than most full-size Fords. But it still handled like the cheap compact it was. Soft suspension, vague steering, and uninspired acceleration made it feel more like a warmed-over commuter car than a legitimate performance machine. And let's not forget the styling. It was about as exciting as a toaster. Ford learned quickly that muscle car buyers didn't just want a bigger engine. They wanted attitude, aggression, and presence. The Falcon Sprint had none of that. It was a timid experiment that paved the way for the Mustang, but on its own, it was a forgettable misfire. Number 7. Pontiac Tempest. Early 1960s. The early Pontiac Tempest was supposed to be a bold experiment, a compact performance car with European flair and cutting-edge engineering. It had a rear transaxle for better weight distribution, a rope drive shaft, and even an optional V8. But what sounded like genius on paper turned into chaos on the road. The quirky drivetrain was fragile and expensive to fix. The handling was unpredictable, and the car's build quality made buyers question if Pontiac had even tested it before selling. And while Pontiac marketed it as a sporty, nimble muscle alternative, most Tempests were slow, buzzy, and awkwardly styled. It tried to be sophisticated, but ended up feeling like a science project that escaped the lab too early. Pontiac eventually scrapped all the weird engineering and turned the Tempest into the basis for the legendary GTO. But those early models remain a warning. Innovation without reliability is just an expensive mistake. Number 8. Mercury Meteor, Comet, early to mid-1960s. If the Mercury Meteor and Comet had a personality, it would be confused. These cars didn't know if they wanted to be sporty, luxurious, practical, or all three. And as a result, they ended up being none of them. Mercury tried to sell them as stylish, mid-size performance options, but most versions were underpowered, softly sprung, and about as thrilling as a damp sponge. The Meteor looked like a downsized Galaxy with zero character, while the Comet felt like a hand-me-down Falcon that got a fancy badge and nothing else. Neither model had the muscle to stand out in the rapidly heating performance market, and buyers treated them accordingly, with indifference. By the late 60s, they were overshadowed by actual muscle cars with real performance and presence. Today, they're mostly remembered as those Mercury things your uncle bought when he couldn't afford a Mustang. Number 9. Studebaker Lark-based sporty trims, early 1960s. Studebaker was already on life support in the early 60s, and the sporty Lark trims felt like a desperate Hail Mary. Instead of engineering a real performance car, they just slapped some badges, chrome, and GT lettering on the same frumpy economy sedan your aunt used to drive to church. The result was embarrassing. It looked outdated the day it hit the showroom and drove like a soggy loaf of bread. Sure, you could get a V8, but power meant nothing when paired with suspension that wobbled, steering that felt disconnected, and brakes that begged for mercy. These so-called sport editions were supposed to revive Studebaker's image, but they only highlighted how far behind Detroit's muscle race the brand had fallen. Buyers weren't fooled. They knew they were paying extra for lipstick on a very tired pig. Number 10. Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu SS 283, 1964. The SS badge has always carried weight, but in the case of the 1964 Chevelle Malibu SS 283, it might as well have stood for seriously slow. Chevy hyped this thing as a sporty mid-size muscle machine, but under the hood was a wheezy 283 cubic inch small block that barely cracked 220 horsepower. It wasn't fast. It wasn't menacing. It wasn't even particularly fun. The styling was mild to the point of invisibility, and the handling was so soft that cornering felt like steering a parade float. Muscle car fans expected thunder, but what they got was a polite golf clap. The Malibu SS 283 sold reasonably well, but it quickly became a forgotten middle child in the muscle era, a car that promised performance and delivered mediocrity. It took the arrival of the Chevelle SS 396 for Chevrolet to finally give enthusiasts something worth remembering. Number 11. Chrysler Valiant Sporty Trims, US-Australia, 1960s. The Valiant was never meant to be a muscle car, and boy did that show when Chrysler tried to pass off sporty trims as something exciting. In both the US and Australia, they slapped on badges like R-Spec or V8 Sport and called it a day. But underneath, it was the same economy-oriented commuter with uninspiring power, soft suspension, and steering that felt like it was connected by rubber bands. The Valiant's lightweight design and small block engines should have made it sprightly, but instead, it just felt out of its depth against real muscle cars. Even the styling tried too hard. Flashy stripes and fake scoops on a body that screamed budget. These trims weren't fast enough for enthusiasts and too stiff for regular buyers. In the end, they were forgotten oddities. Cars that pretended to run with the Mustangs and GTOs, but were quickly left eating dust. Number 12. Dodge Dart. Early 1960s trims. Before late 60s makeover. Before the Dart became a legitimate muscle contender in the late 60s, it was the automotive equivalent of a decaf latte. Technically a car, but not one that would ever get your pulse racing. Dodge marketed the early 60s Dart as a sporty compact, but most trims came with sleepy 6-cylinders or wheezing small V8s that struggled to break a sweat. The suspension was soft, the steering vague, and the design so bland it could disappear in a parking lot full of beige refrigerators. Buyers looking for muscle quickly realized they'd been duped. This was an economy car playing dress-up. It wasn't until the late 60s, with the Dart GTS and Swinger, that Dodge finally figured out how to inject real attitude into the nameplate. But those early models, they're just historical footnotes, proof that sporty badges alone don't make a car exciting. Number 13. MG MGB GT Performance, 1965-1969. The MG MGB GT was supposed to be Britain's stylish answer to America's growing muscle obsession, a nimble grand tourer with performance credentials. The problem? There was nothing remotely performance about it. Under the hood sat a wheezy 4-cylinder that made about as much power as a lawnmower, and even the so-called tuned versions felt sluggish next to Detroit's V8 monsters. Sure, it handled corners nicely, but in a straight line, it was hopeless. By the time you reached 60 mph, a GTO would have already finished lunch and taken a nap. Reliability was another joke. Electrical gremlins, overheating, and oil leaks were standard features. The MGB GT had charm, no doubt, but as a performance machine, it was a fraud. It was the automotive equivalent of a man showing up to a boxing match wearing a tuxedo. Classy, yes, but totally unprepared for a fight. Number 14. Sunbeam Tiger. Early 1960s UK-US. On paper, the Sunbeam Tiger was a genius idea. Take a tiny British roadster, stuff a Ford V8 under the hood, and build a pocket-sized muscle car. And for about 5 minutes it worked. The Tiger was fast, and it did look the part. But then reality set in. The car was a nightmare to service. The engine barely fit, making simple maintenance jobs borderline impossible. The handling balance was all over the place with too much power for the lightweight chassis and too little control to handle it. And build quality? Classic British, meaning you were lucky if it ran all the way home. Despite its speed, it was plagued by reliability issues, poor refinement, and corporate chaos behind the scenes. Roots was bought by Chrysler, who hated the Ford engine inside. The Tiger became less of a performance icon and more of a mechanical headache. A car that roared loud but limped often. Number 15. Vauxhall Victor Sporty Trims, 1960s export models. Vauxhall tried to cash in on the sporty craze by dressing up its dull Victor sedan with badges, stripes, and mild tuning. Unfortunately, underneath the new decals, it was still a Victor. Slow, sloppy, and uninspired. Even the most performance-oriented versions struggled to keep pace with base-model American compacts. The steering was vague, the suspension soft, and the engine so gutless that overtaking required a prayer and a long stretch of road. Export models were even worse. Heavy emissions tweaks and mismatched gearing made them feel like they were towing a caravan uphill. The marketing department shouted sporty, but the car whispered commuter. Buyers ignored it. Collectors forgot it. And today it's mostly remembered as a perfect example of British badge engineering gone wrong. Number 16. Isuzu-sourced, sporty compact imports, 1960s attempts. Back in the 60s, a few small Isuzu-built compacts tried to muscle their way into Western markets with sporty badges and big promises. Spoiler alert, they failed spectacularly. These cars were cheap, slow, and about as exciting as watching paint dry. Acceleration was measured in geological time, handling was numb and uninspired, and the interiors felt like they were designed by people who'd never seen a sports car before. Reliability wasn't much better. Engines were underpowered and overworked, and parts availability was a nightmare. The whole idea was to offer a budget-friendly performance import, but what buyers got was a glorified economy car with racing stripes. In an era dominated by roaring GTOs and screaming Mustangs, these cars were invisible, forgotten almost as quickly as they arrived. Number 17. Hillman Minx Sport Specs, 1960s. The Hillman Minx was about as sporty as a cup of tea, but that didn't stop Roots Group from trying to convince buyers otherwise. Their sport spec versions added go-faster stripes, chrome trim, and the occasional twin-carb engine tweak. But underneath, it was still the same slow, polite family saloon your grandmother drove to bingo night. Acceleration was glacial, handling was floaty, and the brakes had all the confidence of a wet sponge. Even the name Minx sounded more like a house cat than a predator. In a decade when the world was going crazy for raw power and tire smoke, the Minx was out of its league. A car pretending to be wild while politely signaling before every turn. Most buyers ignored it, and those who didn't probably regretted it. Today it's a forgotten curiosity. Proof that adding sport badges to a grocery getter doesn't magically make it exciting. Number 18. Renault Caravelle Floride Sporty Variants, 1960s. The Renault Caravelle, also known as the Florid, was undeniably gorgeous, sleek, elegant, and perfect for a Riviera backdrop. But as a sporty car, forget it. Underneath the chic bodywork was a wheezy little engine that barely pushed the car past highway speed limits. Handling was more about comfort than corner carving, and acceleration. Well, calling it slow is being generous. The driving experience was so underwhelming that even enthusiastic owners admitted the car was more fun to look at than to drive. And then there was the rust. Oh, the rust. These things dissolved faster than cotton candy in rain. Renault tried to sell the Caravelle as a glamorous European alternative to British roadsters. But buyers quickly realized it was more fashion statement than sports machine. Today it's remembered fondly, but never as a performance car. Number 19. Fiat 1500, 1800 Sporty Trims, 1960s. Fiat's 1500 and 1800 sedans were fine little family cars. Nimble, economical, and charming. But when Fiat tried to turn them into sporty versions, the result was laughable. The so-called performance trims offered barely any extra power and absolutely no muscle car attitude. Acceleration remained timid, top speeds unimpressive, and the handling was about as thrilling as driving a sewing machine. Fiat marketed them as agile alternatives to heavier American cars, but in reality they were just commuters wearing racing jackets. They looked the part, but couldn't deliver the goods. Enthusiasts ignored them, collectors forgot them, and even Fiat fans admit these trims were more style exercise than substance. In a decade defined by raw horsepower, the 1500 and 1800 sport versions were just background noise. Number 20. Early 60s muscle look. American compacts. In the early 1960s, American automakers figured out a sneaky way to cash in on the performance craze. Slap fake scoops, chrome badges, and sporty decals on their most boring compact sedans. Then hope buyers didn't notice the engines were still sewing machine slow. Cars like the Ford Fairlane Sport Coupe, Chevy Nova SS, and Plymouth Valiant Sport Special promised muscle car attitude but delivered economy car reality. Most had 6 cylinders that wheezed out less than 150 horsepower, drum brakes that faded at the first sign of excitement, and suspensions that turned every corner into a balancing act. It was classic badge engineering. All show, no go. Buyers quickly caught on, and these cars ended up collecting dust on dealer lots. Today, they're remembered as the worst kind of pretenders, the automotive equivalent of stuffing your shirt with socks and calling yourself a bodybuilder.